Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today I'm super excited to have the CEO of Zebpay with us, and you guys are coming to Australia soon, but we're going to talk about crypto adoption in developing countries. And I've followed your story closely since it began back in 2014, I believe, and we're going to talk about what's happening in India and all that sort of thing. So welcome to the show, Ajit.
It's a delight being here. Thanks for having me.
And for those that haven't followed, talk about how the story started off for Zebpay all those years ago.
So, one of the three founders of Zebpay, even prior to Zebpay, ran a OTC kind of exchange beginning in 2012. At which point of time there was very little activity around Bitcoin, especially compared to today, and also it was not very easy to buy or store Bitcoin. So, for example, multi-sig wallets hadn't yet come in, just as an example, right? The protocol had not yet accepted that as its part. So this guy, Mahim, this founder, ran it for 2 years, then took on two new founders. Together, they started Zebpay. And in its earliest days, it was more of, as in matching the buyer and seller was a difficult thing because there was no depth or liquidity.
Yeah.
So it was more like a OTC-like setup, because there are versions in which you can run your marketplaces. And one of the things that is interesting and not very well known about Zebpay is that when Zebpay started first as a Singaporean company, it decided to be a digital wallet, a wallet for digital assets, because it was turning out to be difficult to store, access, authenticate, secure your digital assets. And once the founders set that up, they realized that not too many people had digital assets. So the need for the wallet was not as intense. So they said, okay, let's do step one, wherein we first go and help people get digital wallets. That's where the Indian operation started. And because of that attitude we had on day one, even before the exchange, that we've got to make all this very easy, we have always been seen as the darling of the newcomer to the industry. So while our market share in India would be somewhere between two-thirds to three-fourths, thereby making us the market leader, but the number of people who first transacted on Zebpay would probably be even a greater proportion than that. And that is what has gotten into our DNA, and that is what we are coming to Australia with.
Fantastic. And yeah, let's dive into that initial plan and how you guys just got such strong traction in India. And how does your plan for the developing countries differ for Australia, for example?
So there are three elements which are foremost to our plan, regardless of developing or developed. However, you use a different version of that. So, for instance, the first one I've already alluded to, which is we believe we are the right platform for the first timer to get in. And by the way, when the first timer gets in, often they stay for a very long time. So, the way we do this, of course, sure that I don't know if we got interrupted there a
Yeah,
little,
it
but
just cut off a little bit. So do you want to start by answering the question again about developed versus developing, and we'll snip that together later.
sure. So there are three pyramids, there are three pillars on which our strategy tends to stand on. And these, I believe, are encoded in our DNA now. So we would do that everywhere, except depending on the market conditions, there will be versions of it. So the first part, I think, is making it easier for the first timer to get in. This encompasses everything right from simple messaging, simple interfaces, relatively fewer pairs that you can transact in, single button operations in terms of UI, UX, etc. So that would be our first step. Second step, which we haven't fully thrashed out for Australia, but I'll share our earlier global experience, is that most exchanges who are doing well have grown very fast. As a result, issues such as customer support, phone support, time of responding to emails tends to be fairly poor. And one can understand that if an organization is going to go so fast, they probably are going to have to struggle to keep up with customer support. But we believe that customer support is probably as important as having a intuitive user interface, because ultimately customer support is also user interface. So we intend to keep building that. So for instance, in our best days, we used to have a team of 250 phone operators working 24/7 and responding to most categories of queries on the phone call. And we would also try our best to keep our hold time to under 3 minutes, and we managed that, I think, in about 90% of the cases. So the first part was help the early user get in. The second part was offer good customer support, and the third part is that while we are on the cutting edge of technology, we try and avoid. And I must tell you that not with 100% effect, because we learn from the benefit of hindsight, but we try and avoid being gimmicky, because what tends to happen is that gimmicks create a good amount of euphoria, which does cause customers to rush in. And then what happens is that they realize, hey, this wasn't all as good as it would seem. So they all rush out also. And this does not allow A, at our end, systems to stabilize, and B, for the customer to have stayed long enough to adopt our purchase or customer journey. So these are the three pillars we tend to stand on, and we would do so in Australia.
And for those people that haven't used Zebpay before, if I'm, again, give an example of a developing country versus our KYC that we're used to, a lot of people are required to upload a number of documents and photos. So how does that work for someone that's in Africa that might have a basic smartphone?
Okay, so the way it works is that even with a basic smartphone, you can complete your KYC. So, but you need to have a camera on that phone. So, since you called it a smartphone, that usually comes bundled with it. Having said that, let's go one step back about the KYC piece and the compliance piece itself. So, what we feel is that as a lot of novices get into this space, it will also attract, and has attracted in the past, a lot of people who will try to prey upon them. So that is where scams, Ponzi schemes, and other bad actions come into the picture. Giveaways, fake giveaways, and the likes, they come into the picture. And when a certain number of them happen, law enforcement gets hyperactive and tends to take a rather adverse view of this space. So I think that there is no doubt that despite the fact that we are, truly, and I don't say this, just for the words, but I truly believe we are ushering in a new era. As in, human beings, the way they will live life will be very different when adoption increases to higher levels. But despite that, we believe that we can't isolate or insulate ourselves from the rest of the system. So we at Zebpay have chosen to be a fully compliant exchange. So when we will run Australian operations, we will be an incorporated company in Australia. We will have an Australian guy heading it. So it won't be that we are on some dodgy island. And I say that with hesitation because you could get back to me and ask, what is a dodgy island? Because I've been asked that in the past, name a dodgy island. So I'm not going to do that. But we will be fully compliant. We are already registered with Austrac, which is your AML, anti-AML body and those kind of things. We intend to be fully compliant. Hence, the KYC, etc., are initial hurdles, which for the innocent or good customer do present to be irritants.
Yep.
But there's no way around that. You will have to upload a certain number of documents. We try to not be worse than accepted standards. By worse, I mean more stringent.
Yeah.
But we tend to be about as stringent as anybody else.
So I want to talk about what made Australia so appealing in just a second, but we just touched on that basic smartphone. So what sort of percentages, and I think it's changed a lot just in the past 10 years, of smartphone and mobile phone penetration do we see in those countries you're operating in?
So what I'm now noticing is that mobile phone connectivity, connected mobile phones are disproportionately high in, let's just say, the underdeveloped world compared to all other amenities that they tend to have, whether it is drinking water, whether it's food, whether it's access to sanitation and those kind of things. When you look at that standard and then you look at who has a mobile phone which is connected, it is disproportionately high. So I think, places in Africa, places in India, places in China, and various other such places, Latin America, etc. So I think that so far has not so much turned out to be our hurdle. Hurdle is more around, I would say, literacy, having a discerning customer. So those are our bigger hurdles, which means customer education becomes primary, as opposed to maybe the earliest players in e-commerce who came in the mid 90s. They would have faced this connectivity hurdle that people don't have devices. How would they buy? I think that luckily for us, we are past that, both in the developed world, where for obvious reasons there's connectivity, and in the not so developed world, where connectivity is still pretty present. They would probably be using like lower speed devices. That's different.
Yeah, and what do you see are the main benefits? Is it just that remittance sort of markets, or are people using this to pay each other in everyday commerce in local countries? And if so, how does that used as a payment, and the on ramps and off ramps for someone that's transacting in cryptocurrency to buy things in the real world?
So since you are from the crypto space, you're wording this question kindly. People who are from, let's say, the business media and are not sold upon crypto, they ask the same question in very uncharitable terms, I must say. So thanks for that. I'm used for the tougher version of this question.
Yeah.
Having said that, I must tell you that I think that this paradigm, as opposed to payment system, this entire paradigm is at its earliest trickle. So there's nothing to say that the entire monetary system as it exists, which means right from assets being transacted a certain way to credit systems evolving to banking systems evolving, there is nothing about digital assets that cannot create all of those systems in the next 4 to 5 years, because it is a smart currency. You can program it, especially Ethereum versus Bitcoin. There's the concept of smart contracts. You can tokenize real world, or let's say physical assets, and add certain intelligence to it, remove the central authority and those kind of things. So I think that it is inevitable that there will be an entire new, Isaac Asimov / Star Trek kind of future that awaits us. Yeah. Having said that, your question becomes very relevant to where we are today and maybe in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months. There, it is a fact that the earliest adopters have chosen speculation / investment as the use case, right? So this pyramid. So if you think of money, we probably started from a barter system a couple of thousand years ago, then moved to various forms of paper / metal / precious metal / natural resource kind of money. Then we came up with notes. Then we evolved a banking system, stock market. Then we had derivatives, etc. What has happened in this system is that we have started from the end. There is this public blockchain to run which we need these things called tokens / coins, which would probably have a value because they add value to the public blockchain. And we have started transacting in that. So without realizing the joys of growing farm food, we are trading in securities contracts on farm food. As in, it's like an inverted pyramid to that extent, but that's okay. As in, we have to start somewhere. So more directly, specific answer to your question. I think that people using crypto as a medium of exchange is happening, but I see that more as a novelty element, as in people are trying it out. Yeah. So that's where we are at present, but we've got to start somewhere.
Exactly, and I think people are more likely to want to spend their crypto in the future if it goes up rather than the crypto winter when we just start to see a bit of spending and then it's all corrected a lot. So what made Australia so attractive? In the pre-interview you were talking about we're sort of somewhere in between on that scale of developing to fully developed in terms of our systems that we have.
So I'll tell you about Australia and also the fit that Australia has with Zebpay. So the good thing about Australia is that on the regulatory compliance law enforcement end, it has taken a fairly reasonable approach, and there is a high degree of clarity. There's never going to be 100% clarity, but compared to so many other markets which don't want to address questions around crypto and want to pretend that it doesn't exist, Australia has taken a relatively more clear approach, which is very important for us. On the other hand, when we look at the maturity of the market, Australia is far ahead of the most populous parts of the world, which tend to be the least developed in terms of, let's say, some parts of Africa, some parts of Asia, Southeast Asia. So it is good that we are going into an evolved customer base. At the same time, compared to the likes of US, South Korea, Japan, where awareness levels as well as participation levels are extremely high on a per capita basis, Australia is still getting started.
I've often said that we are the most crypto obsessed nation per capita, and I've heard there's already 250 registered exchanges here. And I just wanted to touch on that point you mentioned about the regulatory clarity. That's very much for true cryptocurrencies. There's a bit of uncertainty in the sort of what's a utility token space, but as you said, you guys are sticking to the actual what you believe are the true cryptocurrencies with regulatory clarity.
That is correct. So, you know what's happening here is that if you look at the ICO boom, which luckily has ended some time ago, why I say luckily is because it attracted a lot of people who did not have a reasonable reason to ask people for their money, also to get away with raising money. And though several of them shouted from rooftops that they are coming up with utility tokens, you could read their white paper for like 2 minutes and know that the only utility element of this token is that it's being called a utility token. Otherwise, it was in the nature of a capital fundraise. In light of this, I understand the regulators' desire to look at this very closely and not, let some of this escape. But I think that players who are not bad actors tend to get trampled in the bargain. So for now, we are coming to Australia only with 5 coins: Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, XRP, that is Ripple, and Ethereum, which tend to have certain amount of, let's say, cleanliness around them. But I know there are at least two dozen more which we want to bring in, but we don't want to get our customers in trouble, or for that matter ourselves in trouble. So I think that regulations are evolving because we choose to be a fully compliant exchange. One of the good things that we believe transfers to the customer as a result is that tomorrow they won't hear that your exchange got shut down, or that there's an action which now somehow has blocked your assets, etc. That tends to be our attempt.
Yeah, and I want to talk about what happened in India because you guys had such good traction there. And then obviously the Reserve Bank of India really cracked down on crypto and you relocated to Malta. So do you want to talk about that story and, was that really disappointing or what's the future plans there?
So, I want to pull up my thesaurus and find out better words for disappointing. And the most forceful word is probably gut wrenching, heartbreaking, as in I'm looking for those kind of words. So, like I said, not just were we a dominant player, accounting for the majority of the transactions in India, but even more than that, people who entered crypto in India usually entered first on Zebpay. So we were, on the bleeding edge of it. We were helping usher in, like I said, a new paradigm. And we were constantly in touch with all stakeholders in the government, whether it's the securities regulator, the money regulator, which are different in India, and whether it's law enforcement people. And what we found was that they were fairly aware of what's going on. It's not, when we think of government, we say, oh, they know nothing. That was not the case at all. They were fairly aware of what's going on. They were extremely worried about this thing taking off and being out of control, right? And I think, frankly, that's a genuine worry. As a government, I would also be worried. But what was so heartbreaking was that while on the one hand, they refused to come up with any clear policies and say, this is what you can do.
Yeah.
As even if they come up with very stringent things like, okay, you can buy and sell Bitcoin, but you can't withdraw Bitcoin, which I think destroys the purpose, but could still be considered as a day one regulatory approach. That they could say, okay, do this, because there are exchanges around the world which say you can buy and sell here. We will hold it on your behalf, but you can't withdraw, right? Which, of course, is not something I'm advocating at all. But I'm saying there are ways in which you can start your baby steps. So the Indian authorities did not choose to go any of that direction. And then the Reserve Bank of India said, you know what? We have no problem with crypto. It is just that entities that we have licensed, which is all the payment entities, just credit card, debit card, digital wallet, payment gateway, banks, will not touch you guys. And if they touch, if any one of you uses a bank account, which is not just exchanges, even a regular citizen, to buy or sell Bitcoin, that account would have to be shut. Now, what that does is that if you think about it, so what are you going to do? As in, they have not at any point of time said that the asset itself is illegal, or buying, storing, selling is illegal. So there's no illegality in the action, but the only way in which we can done, we won't allow you to use that way, right? Which is like, so what are you saying? So of course we reached all the way to the Supreme Court. We were hoping for immediate redressal because we thought that this totally violates our constitutional rights. We did not get that immediate redressal, and frankly, we are now in something like month 8 or thereabouts of the court case being heard repeatedly. Uh, Theoretically, one could use currency notes to transact, but that is not how business can be transacted and leads to a lot of attendant problems. So yes, it was heartbreaking. So barring Zebpay, I think all other players, I may be wrong when I'm saying all, but probably all other players, try to evolve to a peer-to-peer model. right? And they said a lot of creativity and innovation was brought about in the system where we had an order book which was peer to peer. Then now you have agreed to participate. How will you get fiat currency out of this? Because even individuals can't do it. So they created a separate order book of people who will now help settle these transactions, which is an innovation. As in, I've never heard of anything like this anywhere in the world. And your viewers who are probably hearing this didn't fully get that. But let's just say very creative ways of settling this. We chose not to do that primarily because we thought those systems would land our customers into trouble. If they do peer to peer and the counterparty is a bad actor,
Yeah.
they would be spending their time with law enforcement trying to explain it away as to how did they transact, why is there a direct money relationship with a bad actor. And because of the creativity that came into the system, it led to possibility of more counterparty risk. So we said, while it may be great for us because we would still have 66% of the diminished market, but it is not something we can do to our customers, most of who don't even know there is such a risk.
Yeah, we recently saw India ban the high denomination notes, and we think that the war on cash is going to heat up, particularly if we have another downturn and they need to take interest rates lower. So, do you think it's those sort of worries that are in the back of government's mind? And as we go further down the list, Argentina and Venezuela, they tend to have weaker currency. So, do you think that's why we're going to see governments crack down towards crypto, or do you think they're going to say, no, crypto's a better option than maybe what we've got, let's adopt it? And what sort of opinions do you see?
So I have not seen anywhere in the world, not just the the countries you listed, but let's say the developed world, places like Switzerland, Singapore, Malta, where they actually are very open. They're actually receptive to it. Like even I believe in South Australia, and I don't claim to know Australia very well yet. So they are trying to be very open to it. Despite that, I have not seen an officially stating that it's a better version of money. As in, they are saying that okay, at best, this is an acceptable thing that we will have in our system, right? And while we will encourage the blockchain because blockchain is good, crypto is you heard that just so many times, right? So we'll not even get into that because you are crypto literate, so I don't have to talk about that. But having said that, I think that if I were the government and I had no love lost for crypto, and I'm putting myself in their shoes, I see that they have one or two very genuine worries. Number one is the fact that it removes the central authority and the government is the central authority. So when you have a system which removes central authority, everybody loves it except the central authority. So there is that problem. And the second thing is that the entire concept of a nation state requires you to be able to fund it, namely manage its money, which means it starts from taxation, or let's say in the case of Middle East, access to natural resources. If the government starts losing its touch, especially in countries of very low compliance where the level of legal where the law is not very strong, uh, you would see how the government can actually start panicking, which is why when you look at Japan and South Korea and US, which together account for close to 80% of the transactions, but if we can use that as a proxy for maybe penetration or usage, these tend to be countries which have a relatively more compliant legal framework. Australia also falls into that trap.
Yeah, fantastic. I tend to agree, but I'm just not sure how politically acceptable if they have to do more money stimulus and all that. And for the first time, we've got crypto on the global stage being another option. So that's what's really keeping me interested. I can't wait to see that unfold. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I think that digital money is attractive to all governments. So that is why even things like paper checks are now getting obsolete in most countries. Like I have two bank accounts here in Singapore. They never gave me a checkbook and they said, we don't have a checkbook. So if you need a check ever, you will come to our branch and get one leaf, as in you will get one check.
Yeah.
So I understand why digital money is so attractive.
Yeah.
Now, the digital money as it exists in our system is what I like to call dumb digital money or non programmable, non smart.
Yeah.
So it is an obvious evolution of digital money to make it smarter. And that is where the blockchain comes in and all the environment that gets created around it. I think that this has been recognized by everybody. It is the lack of control. Like, the central banker or a banker or a government official would like a dashboard where they can see, okay, who's paying whom what and what is the activity that's happening, as they can do with the dumb version of digital money. Which is why systems around the blockchain infrastructure are evolving, such as there are today several players like elliptic and chainalysis and the like, who will help you track every transaction and go back a certain number of hops and try to attribute a certain risk factor slash cleanliness or lack of it to how the money has flown. This is not possible in other versions of digital money, because there is no ledger which just does not get ruined. So I think that we are getting there, we are not there yet.
Does Zebpay list privacy coins?
No chance. Not at all. As in, I think that listing privacy coins, and by the way, I'm not saying it out of moral judgment. I'm just saying that we like to list assets which don't get our customers into trouble, and also which don't get us into trouble, because we want to build from strength to strength. So securities token is something we would be interested in the future, when there is regulation around how one could be a securities exchange, which nowhere in the world exists, but privacy is going to always be a concern.
Yeah, I think privacy coins are so important, and those communities are just, they're so important going forward. But I think as a company or an investor, I think it's so risky, because we've already seen Japan just overnight say, no, you got to delist all privacy coins.
Right. So I understand the concept of privacy coins. I see the need for privacy in general, and hence its manifestation on technology. So that part is very clear. It is just that that's at an individual level. But it's like being an airline company and being aggressive in your marketing and finance, but being very conservative on safety.
Yes.
So you live with this sort of a paradox.
Yeah, no, I completely agree why you guys can't list them. What do you think about the future of scaling? So if we do have millions or ideally billions of people using cryptocurrency, are you a free market man? I know you said you list Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, XRP. Do you think may the best system win, or do you have any specific thoughts on how this is going to work if we have billions of people using it?
So my answer is both. Namely, on the one hand, may the best system win. As in, I'm not going to say this coin is delisted because I'm pissed off with the guy who is supporting it. Sorry for making a political crypto statement, because I would like my users to do that. I would like for them to abandon it, and then the future becomes obvious. But having said that, I do have a view about how scaling would occur. If you notice this entire thing about why Litecoin at one time was seen as an evolution over Bitcoin, or Bitcoin Cash with its larger block size was seen as, okay, that amongst other features was, let's say, an evolution on Bitcoin. And then there are other coins which Dash, which has a very interesting way of scaling. I think that those are interesting experiments. Maybe somebody will succeed on that front. But with the coming of the Lightning Network, and in general, layer 2 kind of technologies, which could loosely be called side chains, I think that infinite scaling is possible today with the Lightning Network. It has its limitations, both in terms of adoption as well as how things are set up. But as in 2-3 years ago, everybody would say Bitcoin can do 8 transactions a second, and Visa network can do 2,000, or some other very absurd kind of comparison. And we would say, yeah, you know what, you're comparing your college going child with my kindergarten child and saying, oh, my son knows more than yours. And I'm like, of course, we are in kindergarten, so don't look at it as a snapshot, look at it as an evolution. And I think that evolution has happened. So today, show me how many transactions can I do on Lightning Network versus the Visa network, and see who is ahead. So I think that is where scaling is going to happen.
Yeah, and finally, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on what Bitcoin is, because I think it is different to different people in different countries. And some people say it's not a store of value, and then you ask someone in Venezuela if it's been a good store of value, and some people say it's not a good medium of exchange because of the transactions, as maybe we just discussed. So what have you seen in terms of the spectrum of what Bitcoin means to different people, and where you see it all going forward?
So I think that the use case or the activity around Bitcoin has started in a very large scale, running to billions of dollars per day, on the store of value slash medium of speculation. Okay, at that part, because that's the easiest to do. Like, even when we started as a digital wallet, we eventually became an exchange because we saw that was the path of least resistance. But as evolution occurs, it becomes a store of value beyond the purpose of transaction. It becomes a store of value, and soon starts looking like a medium of exchange when So let's say the current adoption, global adoption is 0.5%, as in 0.5% of people, which by the way is my best estimate,
Yeah.
have some exposure, or at least at some point had some exposure to Bitcoin slash crypto. I think that when this number starts hitting 5 and 10%, because I don't think it's ever going to hit like more than 30%, because 1 year old babies are not going to use it, and tribals where there is no civilization are not going to use it. So I think 30-35% is reasonable. I think the formal monetary system has probably reached more than that as of today. But once we start doing 5 and 10%, a certain stability in price would come in. So, those 15% increases or decreases at a moment's notice would be extremely rare, if at all. The moment price starts looking relatively stable to where it is today, and by the way, I think it will always be more, volatile than, let's say, stocks and bonds. So I'm not saying it will go to that level, but when it becomes relatively more stable, it starts at least invalidating the biggest reason today for people to not use it as a medium of exchange. That if I could just hold on to it for a little longer, I could buy more, I could
Mm.
exchange it for more, because of belief that it has naturally inflationary characteristics. I think that by that time, maybe by the time 20 of the 21 million coins have been released, which means almost all, which happens as recently as next year or two, I think that by that time, we will see the evolution of it being used as a payment method, and these side chains and other methods would have come up with interfaces that are intuitive. And finally, I hope that, like us, everybody is working on easier ways to store your coins. So, the trezors and the ledgers, which are probably the best way to store it today, are not the easiest for most people. As in, when I've tried to teach somebody who's to use them, they do sometimes think it is rocket science.
Yeah.
So we want the sophistication and security of the rocket science, but we want the ease of what they're already doing.
Fantastic. I think that's a great place to finish, unless you've got any other final thoughts for us, Ajit.
So this is phenomenal. I hope to see more of you. I hope to see more of your viewers. And we are going to be in Australia to stay. And we hope to be an accelerant to the overall marketplace, and that everybody succeeds together.
Fantastic. I'll put the links in the description below to check out Zebpay, guys. But thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, guys.